In this video, we'll discuss the features on Christopher Reeve's face that point to very strong willpower and a significant presence of spirit. Enjoy. Hey everybody. So I'm in Fort Bragg, California for my 43rd birthday, which is why I'm sort of here, filming on scene, if you will. There are sea lions in the back. I don't have my condenser microphone. I meant to bring it. The audio will probably not be as good as usual, and there's going to be some background noise. I'll do my best in post-editing shenanigans to get rid of that. But I realized I need to get this out for Monday. Today is currently Saturday, so if I don't do it now, it's going to be a little bit of a rush. So, that being said, if you're new to my face reading channel, welcome. But please go up here and watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video. If you've never seen a face reading, you don't know what it is, I think it's pretty relevant to go watch that, because this is not psychic fortune telling. It's not meant to be predictive, at least in my capacity. This is more about assessing people's facial features in relation to how their life expresses. So that's a good video to go watch if you haven't watched it. If you're liking my content, please like, subscribe, hit that bell notification, share this with someone who you think is interesting, and commenting of any kind is good. The good and the bad. As my subscribers go up, there's a lot of people who are like, this is bullshit. I take it because, fair enough, this is an intuitive art. It's not a direct science, and that's how it goes. The more subscribers you get, the more viewership you're going to get, the more people are going to be at odds with what you're doing. That's okay. It's the way it goes. So please leave the sassy comments. It's fine. It helps the algorithm. So, Christopher Reeve, I have to say, I watched the first Superman when I was 2 years old. It imprinted into my brain. Superman is still one of my primary superheroes. This was my first original Superman, and Christopher Reeve was a kind of an iconic figure, at least in my life. So I wanted to read him. I just watched his documentary. It's called Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. It's in theaters right now. I saw it with my mom. It was really good. It's about his rise to stardom and then his very, very unfortunate accident that he had where he was paralyzed from pretty much the neck down, and what he did with his life force after that. There is nothing more challenging, I think, than going through what he went through. He was an athletic guy. He rode horses. He windsailed. He did everything. And then to be imprisoned in your body, it's a really rough karmic path to walk. But what he did with it, what he decided to do with his life after that, is heroic. You know, case in point, he was Superman, and he really did embody that as he aged. So I wanted to read him. It's a special read for me because I love Superman and I love Christopher Reeve. So that being said, the first thing that I noticed about Christopher Reeve were his eyes. So there's an intensity, especially in his youth here. He was 25 when he filmed Superman. In the world of face reading, you're not supposed to read people before 25. Why? Technically, before 25, the face you're carrying is the face you carry from your parents. It's your mom and dad basically living through your face, and then after 25 is where you start to build your own face to a degree. Does that mean you can't ever read features before 25? No. If I read features on a person who's 24, are they going to keel over? No. There's no bad karma, there's no bad luck, but it's not as accurate as it could be. So, all that being said, his eyes, pretty intense. If you look at this picture here from Superman 1, 1978, there is an intensity in his eyes. So one of the things you have to think about is the age brackets when we're looking at face reading. From the top of the hairline to the bottom, from the bottom of the forehead but the top of the eyebrows, that is your 20s. Your eyes are essentially from the eyebrows down to about here are your 30s, and the nose is the 40s, then it goes into the 50s through the mouth, the 60s down to the chin, and then 70s, 80s, and 90s through this bottom line of the jaw. So the basic idea is gravity moves down and through a person. We are earthbound creatures. So the start of life is at the top and gravity is pushing down, and our life force sort of expresses through the face. Again, you might hear this and think, nonsense. Fair enough. Leave the comments. Rail against it, but this is the Eastern theory. So when the eyes are intense like this, they're very bright, they're very clear. One of the things, the good metric is the 30s can be characterized by sort of an open portal, an open gate. A lot can happen in the 30s when the eyes are big, good and bad. So one of the things they say, his eyes run, I would say on the moderate to large size. The eyes are a water feature when we're assessing landforms in terms of geography on our face. The eyes are a water feature, so the nostrils carry moisture, the eyes carry moisture, the mouth carries moisture, the ears, because of earwax, carries moisture. They see this as water features, which means that the larger those features are, the more water you want to be around. But the eyes, because they're one of the big water features, if you have large eyes, like myself, your life terrain in your 30s can be kind of like wading in open waters, which was very true for me. You're treading water out in the middle of the ocean. There's an intensity that can be good or bad that comes with that. So again, Christopher Reeve was 25 in his Superman debut, and he struggled through his 30s in terms of finding his career path. There was kind of an open water energy to his life terrain. Again, I'm not being predictive with face reading. That's not my goal, is to be predictive or to be psychic. But I did think about this. He struggled through his 30s in terms of wanting something after Superman. He wanted a breakthrough movie, and he didn't want to be typecast as just the Superman character. That being said, very intense eyes, very bright Shen. There's a clarity in his eyes. And I think for a character like Superman, his karmic life path in terms of playing this iconic superhuman character, there's kind of a congruency there. So that's one. Now, the next thing I noticed was his chin. The chin is a water feature. So the wider the chin, the more dominant that chin is, the more water element is going to be prominent in the person's life terrain. So the water element relates to willpower. When you think about willpower, it's stored in the kidneys. The ability to push through life, the willpower to live, essentially. So the Chinese are pretty big on this. You need to have a strong, they call it zhi, Z-H-I in Chinese. It's the willpower. It's the source of your willpower. Christopher Reeve had a very dominant chin, very strong, very robust. And I think in his post-paralysis state of life, that willpower really shows up. He decided to embrace that to the best of his abilities and do something, started a foundation, really put energy towards stem cell research. Interestingly enough, stem cells relate to what comes from our deep marrow, from our bones. Our femurs still produce them if we put them under mechanical stress. So again, strong chin, some of these life metrics expressed, essentially relates to Jing, the constitutional strength of a person, and Christopher Reeve had this. That willpower, though, did show up. I think that's where his chin really served him in life, was post-paralysis. And I'm sure it served in his movie career, him pursuing roles and doing all of that, but his chin was very dominant. When I was looking at his chin, though, even at 25, he had this line here, which is not super favorable. This line that kind of shows up here at 25, he had it. This is indicative of lifestyle depletion. So when a person has this line and it's developing early in life, it means that how they're approaching their life terrain, how they're pursuing their habits, how they're doing things, there can be sort of a wipeout a little bit in terms of how they're expending their energy. So Christopher Reeve did have this. I can't talk to Christopher Reeve. I can't, probe him and find out what that was about. But he did have this marker, lifestyle depletion, and something to think about when we think about how his life terrain unfolded. Now, moving up his face, the other thing I noticed was his nose. So the nose is the central mountain of the face. It relates to the 40s. If you think of youth up here and old age down here, the mountain, the nose, is the middle age. Christopher Reeve's nose, from profile, relatively strong in terms of how it protruded, but his nose narrows at the tip. And he was paralyzed, I believe, at 42, I think. And don't quote me, but I think it was 42, early 40s is when he was paralyzed after going over that horse, breaking his neck. Now, there is nothing in this where I can say his nose narrows at the tip and his nose was a bit weak in this area, therefore it means paralysis. You cannot look at face reading like that and say, well, he's got this nose, so people that have this kind of nose are going to be paralyzed or experience some kind of horrible misfortune. That's not what I'm saying. But when you look at how the face relates to the unfolding of a person's life terrain, these are things I pay attention to. You want to look for. And so his nose does narrow, and there's sort of like a loss of flesh towards the tip. So, by face reading standards, there's a certain link up here in terms of the strength of his nose and the struggle that he had in his 40s. Again, please don't read too much into this. If you get really charged and heated by hearing this kind of thing, face reading is probably not for you. We're just looking at features and looking at how a person's life unfolds. So I did notice that. Now, when we look at Christopher Reeve's face, how the light came out of his face, there's a term in face reading called significant Shen. Shen is the immaterial light that beams from a person's face. So Christopher Reeve had this. Significant Shen means when you look at a person, there's something that is magnetic and that kind of pulls you in. And Christopher Reeve definitely had this. And I think that's part of what got him the Superman role. He was a very handsome man, very good looking, very charismatic, but he had an intensity, and there's those eyes and that Shen, how it comes out of the face was very, very strong. So what I was inspired by from watching his movie was what he did post paralysis. In the movie, they talk about how much struggle he went through, how incredibly difficult it was for him to embrace what had happened to him, to be reliving his life of what he had had prior to the accident and the nightmare of what that was. I mean, I wish that upon no one, but there was a point in his journey where he decided to do something good with it, and he did study stem cells, and he did do his best to start this foundation for those who had been paralyzed. So I think it's really powerful to think about in terms of that significant Shen, how the spirit beamed from the face. There was something significant about what he did, how he imprinted into the world post-accident, because lesser people would have given up and just sort of thrown away their life. You know, there's every reason technically it's viable to just be like, I'm going to give up because my life is over. He did not do that. It's a really powerful story. He's got really dominant features. You know, when I look at his face, he's got a strong jaw, like really strong. And that's all wood energy. That's drive, that's vigor, that's push. You know, it's how you get your message into the world. Dominant water chin, big watery eyes, big prominent brow bone, big eyebrows. He had a lot of elements really working, and in his youth especially had a lot of metal too. The only element that he was technically lacking to a degree would be earth. Earth is the central cogwheel. It's the fleshiness. You know, his face runs a bit more chiseled. He didn't have a ton of earth, but he was dominant in the four elements. And when I was looking at this picture of him smiling, this is one of the pictures that I really liked. There's a lot of glow in his smile, but he's got the good smile lines that show up here. He's also got the lines that kind of carved down this way, the sadness lines. He's also got the dimples when you look at this picture, which is an attention marker, very well suited for the camera, very well suited for the public eye. So, you know, in looking at Christopher Reeve and seeing these things, I just thought it's very cool to see how his features expressed and what he did in the world. I did do his public persona, his natural face, and his inner persona. When you look at his inner persona, that's more of the Christopher Reeve look. That I would say his inner persona looks more like the Christopher Reeve that we know. His public persona, while there's shadows, doesn't look like the character that I would say is Christopher Reeve. His natural face and his inner persona look a bit more congruent. They look a little more alike. And so in face reading, when the inner persona and the natural face are closer, that means that the person usually lives their life in terms of being a little bit more true to themselves. If there's a huge disconnection between the public persona and the inner persona, there's conflict. He doesn't have a huge disconnect, but it's definitely different. His face reads very well, I would say, in terms of the inner persona. His public persona is just a slightly different character, maybe the character that he wanted to live into. Hard to say at this point. But Christopher Reeve, again, I can't speak enough to the thing that I want to stress on is that the impact of who he was, what he did, that significant Shen, and the significance of what he left into the world is pretty powerful. And that's the part that I wanted to read about Christopher Reeve. There's a brightness to his Shen. There's a clarity to how that light comes out of his face. And I think that's the piece that really stands out about Christopher Reeve. And again, for me, the one and only Superman. So these are the ideas. These are the thoughts that I had about Christopher Reeve. If you've got questions, sassy ones as well, please leave them down below. And if you've got questions, be sure to leave those. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks a bunch.